Good afternoon, everybody. Today, I authorize the Armed Forces of the United States to begin a limited military action in Libya in support of an international effort to protect Libyan civilians. That action has now begun.
Across Africa, history and power often meet in unexpected ways. Over the years, the United States military has carried out missions across the continent, from peacekeeping and counterterrorism to humanitarian response. Some operations made headlines, others happened quietly, far from the world's attention. Each one left its mark on nations, on people, and on the course of modern African history. Today, we look at the stories behind those missions, where they happened, why they began, and how they shaped the continent we know today. This is 10 African countries that were invaded by the U.S. military. Beginning at number 10 is Libya. Located in North Africa, Libya was once one of the richest nations on the continent, a desert kingdom turned oil powerhouse under the rule of Muammar Gaddafi. For over 40 years, Gaddafi ruled with both vision and fear. He built schools, roads, and welfare programs that made Libya one of Africa's most developed nations. Yet his iron-fisted control and defiance of the West earned him as many enemies as admirers. By 2010, Libya was stable but tense, a proud nation ruled by a man unwilling to bend. Then came the Arab Spring. Inspired by uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, Libyans took to the streets demanding change. What began as a peaceful protest quickly became a violent confrontation. Gaddafi's army responded with tanks and airstrikes, turning cities like Benghazi into war zones. The United Nations warned of mass atrocities as civilian deaths mounted. Libya's crisis was no longer local. It had become a global concern. On March 17, 2011, the UN authorized military action to protect civilians. 2 days later, the United States, under President Barack Obama,
Today, I authorize the Armed Forces of the United States to begin a limited military action in Libya.
announced it would join NATO allies in launching airstrikes. Washington called it a humanitarian mission, meant to save lives and stop a dictator. But many suspected deeper motives. Libya's massive oil wealth and Gaddafi's push for a unified African currency that challenged Western dominance. That same week, the skies over Tripoli erupted. U.S. warships in the Mediterranean fired more than 100 Tomahawk missiles in Operation Odyssey Dawn, destroying Libya's air defenses. American fighter jets and drones took control of the skies, paving the way for rebel forces to advance. Within weeks, NATO assumed command under Operation Unified Protector, but the U.S. remained the operation's backbone, providing intelligence, surveillance, and precision air power. The war moved fast, and by October 2011, Gaddafi was captured and killed by rebel fighters. The U.S. called it a victory for democracy, the world a triumph of freedom. But soon after, Libya unraveled. Armed militias filled the power vacuum, rival governments emerged, and the country fell into civil war. By 2014, Libya was split between East and West, Tripoli versus Tobruk, each backed by different foreign powers. In the chaos, ISIS established strongholds in Sirte, forcing the U.S. to return in 2016 under Operation Odyssey Lightning, launching drone strikes to eradicate terrorist camps. Years later, Libya remains fractured, its oil wealth contested, its cities divided, its people weary of endless wars. What began as a mission to protect civilians ended with a nation torn apart. For many, Libya stands as the clearest lesson in modern African history that removing a dictator can take days, but rebuilding a country can take generations. At number 9 is Somalia. On the Horn of Africa lies Somalia, a nation blessed with coastline, trade routes, and history, yet scarred by decades of conflict. Once a thriving hub of commerce and culture, Somalia collapsed into chaos after the fall of dictator Siad Barre in 1991. The central government disintegrated, warlords seized power, and famine swept through the land. The world watched a nation tear itself apart, and soon the United States decided to intervene. In 1992, as images of starving children and lawlessness filled global headlines, U.S. President George H.W. Bush announced Operation Restore Hope, a humanitarian mission under the United Nations banner. The goal was simple: deliver food, and restore stability. But in Somalia, nothing was simple. American troops landed in Mogadishu to cheers, but quickly found themselves entangled in the politics of clan warfare. Warlords looted aid shipments, and militias turned against foreign forces. By 1993, the mission had evolved from feeding the hungry to hunting one man, Mohammed Farah Aidid, the most powerful warlord in Mogadishu. The operation shifted from peacekeeping to direct combat, and America's involvement deepened. Then came October 3, 1993, a day burned into U.S. military history. In a bold raid to capture Aidid's lieutenants, U.S. Black Hawk helicopters were shot down over Mogadishu. The fierce battle that followed lasted nearly 18 hours. 18 American soldiers were killed, more than 70 wounded, and hundreds of Somalis, both fighters and civilians, lost their lives. The world saw images of U.S. soldiers' bodies dragged through the streets. The event became known as Black Hawk Down. What was meant to be a short humanitarian mission had turned into a deadly quagmire. Under mounting public pressure, President Bill Clinton ordered American troops to withdraw. By March 1994, the U.S. was gone, leaving Somalia to its fate. For many, it was a humiliating retreat, one that shaped U.S. foreign policy for years to come. But America's presence in Somalia never truly ended. After the September 11th attacks in 2001, the country became part of the war on terror. U.S. drones and special forces began targeting al-Shabaab, a powerful militant group linked to al-Qaeda. Strikes intensified throughout the 2010s, killing top insurgent leaders but also drawing criticism for civilian casualties. Today, Somalia remains fragile, a nation slowly rebuilding under constant threat from extremism. The U.S. still operates from afar, supporting local forces and launching drone strikes against terrorist camps. What began as a mission to feed the starving evolved into one of America's longest, most complex military involvements in Africa. For many, Somalia stands as a symbol of America's dilemma on the continent, a reminder that good intentions can quickly turn into endless wars, and that in a land without order, even the most powerful army can lose its way. At number 8 is Niger. In the heart of West Africa lies Niger, a vast, sun-scorched land of deserts and silence. It's one of the poorest nations on Earth, yet one of the most strategically important. Beneath its endless dunes lies uranium, gold, and a key location in the war against terrorism. For years, Niger was a quiet ally of the West, until the world discovered just how deep America's military footprint had grown inside its borders. After the fall of Libya in 2011, militant groups began spreading across the Sahel, an arid belt stretching from Mauritania to Chad. Al-Qaeda affiliates, ISIS factions, and Boko Haram fighters moved freely across weak borders, striking villages and kidnapping civilians. To counter this growing threat, the United States expanded its operations in the region, using Niger as its central hub. Officially, it was called Training Support. In reality, Niger became a nerve center for American intelligence, drone surveillance, and counter-terror missions across West Africa. Thousands of U.S. troops rotated through bases like Agadez and Niamey, where drones flew daily across the desert, tracking militant movements invisible to the human eye. It was part of a wider mission known as Operation Juniper Shield, a shadow war waged from the sky. For years, few outside military circles even knew America was operating there. That changed on October 4, 2017, when tragedy struck near the village of Tongo Tongo. A U.S. Special Forces patrol, accompanied by Nigerian soldiers, was ambushed by ISIS fighters. 4 American soldiers and 5 Nigerians were killed in a brutal firefight that lasted hours. Videos later surfaced showing insurgents standing over the bodies of U.S. troops, images that shocked the American public and exposed just how active U.S. forces had become in Niger. In Washington, questions erupted. Why were American troops fighting and dying in a country few had heard about? The Pentagon insisted it was part of the global fight against terrorism, a mission to stabilize the Sahel and prevent another Afghanistan. But critics saw a different picture, a quiet expansion of U.S. military presence across Africa, with little public debate or accountability. Since then, Niger has remained a cornerstone of U.S. operations. The Agadez drone base, one of the largest built by the U.S. in Africa, continues to launch surveillance and strike missions across Mali, Libya, and Nigeria. Yet the country itself remains unstable, facing coups, insurgencies, and widespread poverty. Today, Niger stands as both a partner and a symbol of America's invisible war in Africa, a place where the fight against terror never truly ends, and where the line between defense and domination grows thinner with each drone that takes off into the desert sky. At number 7 is Kenya. In the heart of East Africa lies Kenya, a land of beauty and resilience, known for its wildlife, highlands, and bustling capital, Nairobi. For decades, Kenya stood as one of Africa's most stable democracies, a hub for tourism and trade. But behind the calm and progress, a growing shadow crept across its borders, one born from the chaos of neighboring Somalia. That shadow was Al-Shabaab, and it would change Kenya forever. In the aftermath of Somalia's collapse in the 1990s, extremist groups found refuge in the lawless lands beyond Kenya's eastern border. By the mid-2000s, Al-Shabaab, an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, had become a regional threat, launching attacks not only inside Somalia, but across the Horn of Africa. Kenya, once safe, suddenly found itself on the front line of the global war on terror. After the September 11th attacks, the United States began building close military ties with Kenya. The country became one of Washington's most trusted partners in East Africa. American troops, intelligence officers, and counter-terror specialists arrived quietly, helping train Kenyan forces and sharing surveillance data. The coastal city of Manda Bay became a key American outpost, hosting special operations and drones aimed at tracking militants deep inside Somalia. The partnership grew stronger after Kenya joined the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, in 2011. Kenya's troops, backed by U.S. intelligence and air support, crossed the border to fight al-Shabaab directly. For Washington, Kenya was no longer just an ally, it was a forward operating base in the war on terror. But al-Shabaab struck back with vengeance. In 2013, gunmen stormed Nairobi's upscale Westgate Mall, killing 67 people in a brutal siege that shocked the world. 2 years later, the group attacked Garissa University, massacring 148 students. Each attack sent a message that Kenya's alliance with the U.S. had made it a target. In response, U.S. drones launched precision strikes against al-Shabaab leaders across the Somali border, many from bases inside Kenya. Intelligence cooperation deepened. American advisors trained elite Kenyan units, while U.S. surveillance flights patrolled the Horn of Africa daily. Yet the threat persisted. On January 5, 2020, al-Shabaab launched a daring raid on Camp Simba, a U.S.-Kenyan base in Manda Bay. 3 Americans were killed, aircraft destroyed, and the world was reminded that the war was far from over. Today, Kenya remains one of America's strongest security partners in Africa, a nation that has paid dearly for standing against extremism. From drone bases to training missions, the U.S. presence endures quietly but powerfully. For many, Kenya's story is one of courage and consequence, proof that in the fight against terror, alliances can bring strength, but also unimaginable sacrifice. At number 6 is Mali. In the vast stretches of West Africa lies Mali, a land of ancient empires and golden cities. Once home to the legendary kingdom of Timbuktu, Mali was a symbol of African civilization and learning. But centuries later, the empire of scholars and traders became a battlefield of insurgents and foreign armies. And at the center of that storm stood the United States, fighting a war most of the world barely noticed. The story began in 2012, when a coup in Bamako toppled the Malian government. In the chaos, separatist rebels from the Tuareg ethnic group seized control of the north, declaring an independent state called Azawad. But soon, radical Islamist groups hijacked their rebellion. Armed with weapons that had flooded in from post-Gaddafi Libya, militants linked to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, a QIM, and other jihadist factions swept through northern Mali, capturing cities like Gao and Timbuktu. Ancient shrines were destroyed, civilians fled, and the Malian army crumbled. The world watched as one of Africa's most stable democracies disintegrated almost overnight. France, Mali's former colonial power, responded first with Operation Serval, a full-scale intervention to drive the militants out. But behind the scenes, the United States played a crucial role. American drones provided intelligence, satellite imagery, and targeting data for French forces. U.S. cargo planes transported troops and equipment across the desert. What was once a local conflict had become part of the global war on terror. Washington soon expanded its presence across the Sahel under Operation Juniper Shield, a mission that stretched across Mali, Niger, and Chad. Special forces teams arrived to train local soldiers, build counter-terror units, and hunt extremist leaders. Officially, the U.S. described its role as advisory, but American surveillance drones began to patrol Mali's skies, sharing real-time intelligence with French and African allies. Despite foreign help, Mali's troubles deepened. Corruption, weak governance, and ethnic rivalries fueled resentment. Militants regrouped, spreading attacks into Burkina Faso and Niger. In 2020 and again in 2021, Mali's army staged coups, severing ties with Western partners. The U.S. suspended cooperation, while Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group filled the void, signaling a new chapter in Mali's fractured struggle. Today, Mali remains a frontline in the fight for Africa's stability. The U.S. no longer operates as openly, but its drones still watch from above, and its intelligence networks remain woven into the region's security fabric. For many, Mali stands as a warning that defeating terrorism requires more than missiles and training. It demands unity, justice, and a government its people can trust. Without those, the desert will keep producing new wars long after the old ones are forgotten. At number 5 is Chad. In the scorching heart of Central Africa lies Chad, a landlocked nation of sand, sweat, and struggle. Surrounded by conflict on all sides, Chad has long stood as a crossroads of Africa's wars, from Libya to Sudan, from Boko Haram to ISIS. For decades, it has been a country that fights not just to survive, but to hold back the chaos around it. And in that mission, one of its most powerful allies has been the United States. After the fall of Gaddafi's Libya in 2011, militant groups poured across the Sahara, arming insurgents from Mali to Nigeria. Chad, under the longtime rule of President Idris Deby, became the front line in the West's war on terror in the Sahel. Though one of the poorest nations in the world, Chad possessed one thing most of its neighbors did not: a capable army hardened by years of desert warfare. The U.S. saw an opportunity. Through Operation Juniper Shield, Washington began training Chadian troops, providing vehicles, equipment, and intelligence. The country's capital, N'Djamena, became a regional command hub, home to both U.S. and French military personnel coordinating missions across West and Central Africa. From the skies, American drones monitored militant movements, relaying data to joint operations targeting Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa. Officially, the U.S. called it Counterterrorism Partnership. In reality, Chad became one of America's most important outposts in the region, a silent ally holding back extremist expansion across the Sahel. American advisors worked alongside Chadian commanders, and the two militaries grew increasingly intertwined. Yet behind the cooperation lay unease. Deby ruled Chad with an iron fist, suppressing dissent and extending his power through decades of contested elections. Critics accused Washington of turning a blind eye to authoritarianism for the sake of military access. But as long as Deby's army fought America's enemies, the partnership endured. In April 2021, everything changed. Idris Deby was killed on the battlefield while leading his troops against northern rebels, a dramatic end for a leader who had ruled for 30 years. His death plunged the country into uncertainty. A military council led by his son Mohammed Deby seized power. The U.S. called for a swift return to civilian rule, but operations quietly continued, the fight against terrorism too critical to abandon. Today, Chad remains a fortress in a region of fire, one of the last strongholds against jihadist movements spreading through Africa's interior. U.S. drones still patrol its skies, and American support flows through its bases. For Washington, Chad is a reminder that stability often comes at a price. And for the Chadian people, it's proof that even in partnership, a small nation can become the battlefield for someone else's war. At number 4 is Cameroon. In the dense forests and savannas of Central Africa lies Cameroon, a country once known for peace, stability, and culture. But over the last decade, Cameroon has become a silent battleground in America's expanding war on terror. What began as a fight against a local insurgency soon drew in one of the world's most powerful militaries, the United States. The story began on the nation's northern frontier, where the chaos of neighboring Nigeria spilled across the border. Boko Haram, a jihadist group that rose in northeast Nigeria, unleashed terror across the region, burning villages, kidnapping women, and slaughtering civilians. Their attacks didn't stop at the border. By 2014, Boko Haram had begun raiding towns inside Cameroon's far north region, killing hundreds and forcing thousands to flee. The violence transformed Cameroon from a quiet neighbor into a frontline state. In response, the Cameroonian government reached out to its Western partners for help, and Washington answered. Under President Barack Obama, the United States deployed nearly 300 military personnel to Cameroon in October 2015. Officially, their mission was surveillance and reconnaissance, to help local forces track Boko Haram fighters. But behind that modest language was a significant escalation. The construction of drone bases, the arrival of special operations teams, and the establishment of an American military presence that extended across the Lake Chad Basin. U.S. drones based near Garua began flying missions day and night, collecting intelligence across the borderlands of Cameroon, Niger, and Nigeria. The data guided local and regional troops in ambushes and raids, helping to disrupt Boko Haram's movements. American advisors trained elite Cameroonian units, and new technology, including night vision and satellite imagery, gave Cameroon's army an edge it had never had before. But as the war dragged on, darker stories emerged. Human rights groups accused Cameroon's security forces of torture, disappearances, and extrajudicial killings at bases where U.S. personnel were present. Washington denied any direct involvement, but faced growing criticism for supporting an army accused of abuse. Still, the alliance continued. For the Pentagon, Cameroon was too strategically important to lose, a bridge linking Central Africa to the volatile Sahel. Over time, Boko Haram splintered, weakening under pressure, but new extremist cells rose in its place. Meanwhile, Cameroon faced another crisis, an Anglophone separatist war in the country's west. As the state fought on two fronts, U.S. involvement became quieter but no less present, shifting toward intelligence and counter-terror support. Today, Cameroon remains part of America's invisible network of counter-terror operations across Africa. The drone flights continue, the training persists, and the fight goes on. For many, Cameroon's story captures the paradox of U.S. intervention, a partnership built on security but shadowed by silence, where victory is measured not in peace, but in the absence of greater chaos. At number 3 is Algeria. Stretching across the Sahara's endless sands, Algeria is Africa's largest country, a land of deserts, mountains, and oil. For decades, it stood as one of the continent's most secretive powers, rich in natural resources, militarily strong, and fiercely protective of its sovereignty. But beneath its surface lay a long and violent struggle, one that would eventually draw the quiet attention of the United States. In the early 1990s, Algeria descended into one of the darkest chapters in its history, a civil war that claimed more than 150,000 lives. After the military canceled elections likely to be won by an Islamist party, the country exploded into violence. Rebel groups, including the armed Islamic group, GIA, launched a brutal insurgency marked by massacres, assassinations, and terror bombings. The government fought back with equal ferocity. It was a war with no rules, a war that scarred a generation. By the early 2000s, the fighting had slowed, but remnants of those militant networks survived. Many regrouped under a new name, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, expanding their operations across the Sahara. Their rise came just as the United States declared its global war on terror after 9/11. Suddenly, the deserts of Algeria were no longer just a local battleground, they were part of Washington's wider war. Although Algeria resisted any notion of foreign boots on its soil, it quietly cooperated with American intelligence. Under programs like the Trans-Sahara Counterterrorism Initiative and later Operation Enduring Freedom, Trans-Sahara, the U.S. provided Algeria with surveillance support, counter-terror training, and intelligence sharing. American drones and spy planes flew along the Sahel's air corridors, tracking jihadist movements from Mali to southern Algeria. For Washington, Algeria was a crucial partner, one of the few African nations with a disciplined, battle-hardened army, and a clear stance against Islamist extremism. Joint exercises and military coordination expanded, but always discreetly. Algeria never allowed direct U.S. combat operations on its territory, determined to maintain its independence after decades of French colonial rule. Still, the relationship was not without tension. U.S. officials often criticized Algeria's heavy-handed tactics, while Algerian leaders accused Washington of meddling too deeply in regional affairs. Yet both sides needed each other, the U.S. for Algeria's regional influence, and Algeria for intelligence that kept jihadist networks in check. Today, Algeria remains a cornerstone of America's security strategy in North Africa, a partner built on pragmatism, not friendship. The cooperation continues quietly, shaped by mutual suspicion and necessity. For many, Algeria's story shows a different kind of U.S. intervention, one fought not with airstrikes or invasions, but with intelligence, diplomacy, and shadows. A reminder that in modern warfare, power is not only measured by the armies you send, but by the secrets you share. At number 2 is Tunisia. On the northern edge of Africa, where the Mediterranean meets the desert, lies Tunisia, a nation small in size but vast in influence. For decades, Tunisia was seen as one of the continent's quiet success stories, a stable economy, booming tourism, and a population known for education and openness. But in 2010, a single spark in a small Tunisian town ignited a revolution that would shake the entire Arab world and eventually draw the attention of the United States military. It began with the self-immolation of a street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi, whose act of protest against corruption set off mass demonstrations. Within weeks, millions of Tunisians poured into the streets, demanding change. By January 2011, longtime President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali fled the country, marking the first victory of what became known as the Arab Spring. The world celebrated Tunisia's courage, but revolution came with a price. The fall of the regime created a power vacuum, and extremist groups began to fill it. Smugglers and militants crossed freely from neighboring Libya, bringing weapons and ideology. Suddenly, the same country that inspired democratic hope was battling a rising tide of jihadism. In 2015, Tunisia suffered 2 devastating terrorist attacks, one at the Bardo National Museum in Tunis, the other on a beach in Sousse. Dozens of foreign tourists were killed, and the shock rippled far beyond North Africa. The Islamic State claimed responsibility, and Tunisia, once viewed as the Arab world's democratic miracle, became a front line in the global war on terror. It was then that the United States deepened its involvement. Washington expanded military cooperation, providing counter-terror training, intelligence, and equipment to Tunisian forces. That same year, the U.S. designated Tunisia a major non-NATO ally, the first in North Africa. American surveillance drones began operating from Tunisian bases, monitoring militant movements across the Sahara and Libya. Behind closed doors, joint operations between U.S. and Tunisian special forces quietly targeted ISIS cells along the border. The cooperation marked a new phase in America's presence in North Africa, quieter, more calculated, and focused on intelligence rather than invasion. But it also raised questions about sovereignty and secrecy. While many Tunisians welcomed the partnership, others feared becoming entangled in foreign wars that stretched from Libya to Syria. Today, Tunisia remains one of the few democracies to survive the Arab Spring, yet it continues to wrestle with economic hardship and political instability. American support endures through funding, training, and surveillance, though always in the background. For many, Tunisia's story is a reminder that democracy alone cannot guarantee peace. And for the United States, it shows how even a revolution born from hope can evolve into another chapter in the endless shadow war against terror. Finally, at number 1 is Egypt. At the crossroads of Africa and the Middle East lies Egypt, a land of ancient power and modern ambition. For centuries, it has stood as the cultural and political heart of the Arab world, commanding both respect and attention. But Egypt's modern story is also one of shifting alliances, military might, and quiet American influence, a partnership forged in war, money, and strategic necessity. It began in the aftermath of the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. Seeking peace and stability, Egypt's President Anwar Sadat took a bold step that stunned the world. He made peace with Israel. The move ended decades of conflict, but isolated Egypt from much of the Arab world. In return, the United States stepped in, with billions in aid, weapons, and military support. Through the Camp David Accords of 1978, Egypt became America's most important ally in the Arab world. The two nations sealed a military partnership that would reshape North Africa's balance of power. From that point on, the U.S. military presence in Egypt became permanent. Massive joint exercises known as Operation Bright Star began in the early 1980s, bringing together tens of thousands of American and Egyptian troops. American weapons flowed into Cairo, and Egyptian officers trained in U.S. academies. Washington supplied fighter jets, tanks, and missiles, all in the name of regional stability. Egypt became the second largest recipient of U.S. military aid after Israel. But the relationship was never without tension. When the Arab Spring erupted in 2011, Egyptians filled Tahrir Square demanding the end of Hosni Mubarak's 30-year rule. The U.S., caught between ideals and interests, hesitated. Mubarak eventually fell, replaced by the elected Islamist leader Mohamed Morsi, whose rise unsettled Washington. Within a year, Morsi was overthrown by the military under Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, with quiet U.S. approval. Since then, Egypt has remained both an ally and enigma. The war on terror gave new purpose to the partnership. American drones and surveillance aircraft began operating in coordination with Egyptian forces, especially in the Sinai Peninsula, where ISIS-linked militants waged a deadly insurgency. The U.S. provided intelligence, logistical support, and funding for counter-terror operations, all while publicly emphasizing stability. Critics argued that Washington turned a blind eye to human rights abuses under Sisi's government in exchange for military access and influence. But for the Pentagon, Egypt's geography was too important. The Suez Canal, the Red Sea, and the gateway to Africa's north made it a strategic prize no superpower could ignore. Today, Egypt remains a cornerstone of U.S. policy in the region, a powerful military partner standing between chaos and control. For many, its story reveals the true nature of American influence in Africa. Alliances built not on values but on necessity, where stability is prized above freedom and friendship is measured in firepower.